All right, welcome everybody. I'm Rabbi Micah Streifer, and I'm excited for us to be able to gather and to study together poetry of the Exodus and Pesach with Rabbi Pam Wax. So let me give a brief intro bio of her, and then we'll say the blessing for study, and then I'll turn things over to her so that we can begin our learning journey together. Rabbi Pamela Wax is the author of several books, including Walking the Labyrinth and Starter Mothers. Her poems have received numerous awards and been widely published. She facilitates online spiritual poetry writing and spiritual journeying workshops. She walks labyrinths in the northern Berkshires of Massachusetts. And I'll also mention that Rabbi Wax has a new book immediately forthcoming. It's called Every Single Beast of My Heart. And there is an online book launch coming up at the end of May. So in a minute, I'm going to drop the document for this session into the chat. If you'd like to contact Rabbi Wax and attend her book launch or just contact her in general, her email will be on the document that I'm about to drop into the chat. So let's join together in the blessing for study. I would invite you to unmute yourself now if you're comfortable doing so, and we'll join together in this blessing, and then we'll turn things over to Rabbi Wax to teach us. Please join me. Baruch atah
Baruch
Adonai,
atah Adonai,
Eloheinu melech
Eloheinu
haolam,
melech haolam,
asher kidshanu
asher kidshanu
b'mitzvotav,
b'mitzvotav,
v'tzivanu
v'tzivanu
la'asok
le'asok
b'divrei Torah,
b'divrei Torah.
which means praised is the eternal source of the universe, whose mitzvot, whose commandments bring us holiness, and who commands us to immerse, to engage in words of Torah. Rabbi Pamela Wax, take it away.
Okay, welcome everybody, and an early Chag Sameach. It's thrilling to be here and to teach one of my favorite topics, which is poetry. I'm going to share my screen, but the document is now in the chat as well, if it's easier for you to download it that way. We're going to look at a number of poems, but it's an 18-page document. We cannot look at all of them in an hour. So I'm going to welcome comments, but limit them as well so that we can get through as many poems as possible. I'm going to start with a short poem by a living poet, Andrea Cohen, from the Boston area, called Fellow Traveler. She's known for her pithy short poems, and this one is called Fellow Traveler. She went everywhere with an empty suitcase. You never know when you'll need to leave swiftly with nothing. Now Andrea has written a number of Passover poems. This one I can't promise is particularly, that was behind this particular poem, but to me it feels like a Passover poem and an Exodus poem. And it reminds me of the practice that I know some North African Jews have had of bringing a suitcase to the seder table as one of the symbols for seder. And I'm just curious how this poem lands for any of you as an opening poem to the theme of Exodus. Any thoughts, comments? Would you use it at your seder, Louise?
Hi, good afternoon. My first reaction was the thought of Jews fleeing from Germany and Poland during World War II. But I understand the idea of, leaving swiftly from anywhere with nothing. And the idea of putting a suitcase on the seder table sounded really great. I like that idea a lot. Almost as much as I like the idea of having a dog bone on the Seder plate because of all the animals that need rescuing. So
I haven't heard of that one, but it fits into the next poem we're going to look at. Thank you. Bob.
I had always wondered, and I thought is not to have an empty suitcase, but something with certain things in it. And there was something my father referred to with the Yiddish phrase, the sieben Sachen. And there were seven things, and I can never figure out what they might have been for ritual observance that you wanted to take with you if the pogrom was coming and you had to flee. So I don't know if that's familiar to anybody or ties into this at all. I don't know.
Well, certainly the idea that if you knew you might have to flee, your suitcase would not be empty. It would have important things in it, right? So that's part of the point of the poem, is the irony of really start at the end of the poem, that sometimes you're going to have to leave with nothing, but that the empty suitcase represents that. Micah.
Yeah, I appreciate that this poem, it connects Passover to me with the refugee experience, the experience of having to leave with nothing. And I don't know how often we stop to think about the idea that those who are leaving Egypt are refugees. They are in no place. They're no longer where they were. They're not yet in another place. And so what do you have when you're in the middle? You have, in a sense, an empty suitcase. And that I think it raises up what is, the moral imperative, or at least a moral imperative that can come out of Pesach today, to be aware of those people who have empty suitcases, or those people who have to flee somewhere and who are therefore experiencing the same thing that our story tells about.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I love that tie-in to what's happening in the world. Thank you. So the next poem, also Andrea Cohen, she calls it Exodus. The whole thing is here on the screen. The flatbread that scratched our throats was not symbolic. We left too quickly to bring the symbols. Neither did the bread portend of manna. It was bread. We left with the skin on our backs, with the imprint of whips. The symbols came after, finding us the way a lost dog, crossing deserts, pinpoints the master who can't live without him. So in the first poem, we had a very clear image of an empty suitcase representing leaving with nothing. Here we have a complicated metaphor, which has to do with symbols, and it has to do with a lost dog and a master. But let's talk about the symbols first, what you think she is trying to tell us, which we already know about Passover and its symbols. Anybody want to? Say anything? I would say until the symbols came after, before we get to the dog, about what this poem is saying. Go ahead, Bob. Thank you.
I can't avoid the dog. I think this is a justification for the dog bone on the Seder plate.
You're Louise's friend, I can tell. So, Cheryl, I see your hand.
Yeah, for us, matzah is one of the main symbols of Seder. And for them, matzah wasn't a symbol. Matzah was just the bread that they took with them. It just didn't happen to have time to rise.
Great, great.
And,
so,
as for the dog, somehow I was going to comment on this with the last one, and this kind of emphasizes it for me. My cat died 2 weeks ago, and I've been kind of going around feeling kind of naked with, because I've been missing that part of me, that my suitcase has been empty.
Huh.
Because of that. Everywhere I go, there's she's there, but she's not there.
Okay.
And so she's the lost dog that's not coming after me. And excuse me.
Okay, so let's get to the lost dog.
Go on. I need to.
Okay. Okay. We'll go on to the lost dog. But you all got to the point that what we understand as symbols for Seder or for Passover were not symbols yet for the Israelites. They were not symbols, right? So at this point, she says that the symbols came after, finding us the way a lost dog crossing deserts pinpoints the master who can't live without him, which is to say how necessary symbols are. We can't live without them. Lauren, I see a hand.
I think that, to me, obviously, the lost dog are the Jewish people and the master is God. That's, I think, fairly clear. But I think that this is a very, very survival-oriented conversation and gives us a reason and a justification of our own internal hope that we can live without our symbols in getting to where we need to get, and then we may be able to understand our history based upon what we came from. So I think this is quite a remarkable statement of endurance.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. It is probably, well, I can't say that it's the only theological poem in this packet, but it is really saying something quite profound about the importance, I think, of symbols for our survival in the long run. What did not start as symbols, but how we survive because of them. So I'm going to go on to a long poem by Marge Piercy called Maggid, which is a poem of Jewish history in some ways. It may be one that you've seen. It does appear in some contemporary Haggadot. And I don't know that we really need to talk about it so much, but I felt it was important for you all to know it in case you have not seen it before. Maggid. The courage to let go of the door, the handle. The courage to shed the familiar walls, whose very stains and leaks are comfortable as the little moles of the upper arm. Stains that recall a feast, a child's naughtiness, a loud blistering storm that slapped the roof hard, pouring through. The courage to abandon the graves dug into the hill, the small bones of children and the brittle bones of the old, whose marrow hunger had stolen. The courage to desert the tree planted and only begun to bear, the riverside where promises were shaped, the street where their empty pots were broken. The courage to leave the place whose language you learned as early as your own, whose customs, however dangerous or demeaning, bind you like a halter you have learned to pull inside to move your load. The land fertile with the blood spilled on it, the roads mapped and annotated for survival. The courage to walk out of the pain that is known into the pain that cannot be imagined, mapless. Walking into the wilderness, going barefoot with a canteen into the desert, stuffed in the stinking hold of a rotting ship, sailing off the map into dragons' mouths. Cathay, India, Serbia, Goldena, Medina, leaving bodies by the way like abandoned treasure. So they walked out of Egypt. So they bribed their way out of Russia under loaves of straw. So they steamed out of the bloody, smoking charnel house of Europe on overloaded freighters forbidden all ports. Out of pain into death or freedom or a different painful dignity, into squalor and politics. We Jews are all born of wanderers, with shoes under our pillows, and a memory of blood that is ours raining down. We honor only those Jews who changed tonight, those who chose the desert over bondage, who walked into the strange and became strangers, and gave birth to children who could look down on them standing on their shoulders for having been slaves. We honor those who let go of everything but freedom, who ran, who revolted, who fought, who became other by saving themselves. So, this is a wonderful, I don't know how many of you are still putting together your contemporary Haggadot, but this is a wonderful way to talk about Exodus, but link it to all of Jewish history that came after. How many of you did see this poem before? Any of you? No? Okay. Well, I'm glad. Vicky, you had seen it. Okay. Any, just one comment, anything that's burning to say about it from anyone before we go on? Okay. I'm going to skip that one. We can only do so many. There are a number of poets who imagine themselves crossing the sea. There is a famous one by Merle Feld. There's a well-known one by Rabbi Ruth Sohn. This is one that my friend poet Sarah Van Arsdale wrote as her gift to my husband and myself when she came to our seder in 2004. It's called Passover 2004. I was just telling Rabbi Streifer that I haven't had a seder at home since the pandemic, so it's a good memory, 2004, when I had a lot of guests around the table. We step into the reed sea, the stones knuckling our bare feet, seawater bridling our dusty legs, clutching our parcels of food, the babies, a goatskin sack holding the bones of the dead. You reach for my hand, but I'm lofting someone's infant over my head out of the water's treacherous reach. Behind us, across the desert pan, the dusty ruckus of Pharaoh's horses, the ribboning current sluices around my hips, now circling my waist, my skirt ballooning with sea stuff as I lift the infant higher, the water now at my chest. With your free arm, you reach beneath my shoulder, pulling me up toward the high blue sky. None of us knows what's on the other side. We're each at sea here in the beautiful, mortal world, not knowing if the waters will part or what's approaching from behind, how long it will take, or what relief may lie ahead. So I don't know how many of you are regular readers of poetry, but just look at the amazing verb she uses in this poem. It's just that's part of what I love about it. Stones knuckling, seawater bridling, clutching. I'm lofting. I mean, just not your run-of-the-mill verbs. That she just collects, ribboning current. I mean, some of these are used as adjectives. The sluices, I don't even know how to pronounce it correctly, sluices. And, a little bit about form. If we go back to the Marge Piercy poem, she has sestets. She has 6-line stanzas, very evenly crafted. Exodus by Andrea Cohen was a 1-stanza poem. but this was the first one you had stanzas, 2 couplets and a singlet. So, part of what I love to impart also when I do poetry workshops is the craft of poetry, and we'll talk about that along the way when appropriate. Micah, I'm sorry, do you prefer Rabbi Streifer or?
Micah's fine. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. I'm really interested and have always been really interested in this idea that as Jews we're supposed to not just remember the Exodus, but reenact or
Mm,
see ourselves living it. And I feel like she does a beautiful job here of suggesting that the Exodus is every moment. In the last stanza, she talks about how we are here not knowing what's ahead, not knowing what's behind. And that feels to me like, how many exoduses do we have in our lifetime? How many moments do we have where you don't know what's ahead, you don't know what's behind, you decide to plunge in? And I think the verbs, she's describing the water, the swirling water, but she's also describing sort of like the swirling chaos of walking through life. And so I really appreciate that she's made it both about the Exodus, but also, at least to me, I assume she did it on purpose. She made it about all these other moments of our lives also.
yeah. Yeah. And it comes together in that final stanza, which is just so exquisite. The beautiful mortal world. Yeah. Louise?
Uh, Two things. One is that it reminded me of the Midrash about Nachshon. Everybody was standing at the edge of the Reed Sea, and nobody was stepping forward, and the water was rising, and finally Nachshon took the step, and
Beautiful.
everybody else followed him. The other thing is that I got a lot of the idea of courage from this poem, which linked it to the Marge Piercy poem, which has the reiteration of the word courage and the idea of courage.
Okay. I'm glad you said that because if you don't know the word anaphora, Anaphora, it is refers to a word that gets repeated in a poem. So
Ah,
in that poem, courage is anaphora because she comes back to it again and again.
thank you.
Okay. I imparted something else. Passover by Linda Paston, one of the underrated poets. Um, just an amazing poet. This one has a number of sections, but for the interest of time, I just want us to look at the last stanza, and you have it all to read. The first stanza just, sort of she's setting the Seder table, but then she brings it home. And she wrote this many years ago because she's already dead a few years, but just feels so contemporary still. Far from Egypt, I have sighted blood, have heard the throaty mating of frogs. My city knows vermin, animals loose in hallways, boils, sickness, hail. In the suburban gardens, 17-year locusts rise from their heavy beds in small explosions of sod. Darkness of newsprint. My son, my son. So in some ways, because you don't know the section where she talks about the wise son and the wicked son, it's a reference, I think, going back to the 4 children in the Seder, and fear for them, fear for her children. But taking, this is a new way of using the symbols, um, the words of Seder, and making something new and contemporary. And she does that in a lot of her poems. If I ever get invited to teach Genesis poems, she has an Adam and Eve poem that makes me cry no matter how many times I read it, because she takes something that's old and brings it into today's world. And that's what I feel she's doing here. Um, Any thoughts?
My son is a reference to the
Context,
four.
but Lauren?
Do you feel that the my son is a reference to the four?
Well, I think she's bringing back something she talked about earlier in terms of the children, but I also think it's looking towards her fear for the future. With this whole idea of what's unleashed in the city. And then it's the darkness of newsprint, what she's reading in the paper. So I feel it's really talking about despair and fear for the future. Louise.
There seems to be a double idea that I'm getting from this one stanza. The locusts exploding out of the sod is kind of, locusts are destructive creatures, but they're also coming to life in an explosive way. And the darkness of newsprint, yes, the darkness of bad things going on, but maybe, and then followed by my son, maybe her son was just being born and the darkness was the blood from birth.
Well, you notice that, she is reinvoking the plagues in this stanza.
Right.
The son part is the death of the firstborn. I mean, that's where part of the despair or the fear, I think, is for me at the end there, that it is the 10th plague. And she sort of walks us through the other plagues, and then we land there.
I think you take it all, there's so many layers of meaning, which makes it glorious.
It is. And, I will encourage you to read the other poems in the packet after we, meet. And if you have any thoughts or comments when you see it in context with the other stanzas, which is really how you should read a poem, I would love to hear them if you see something new. John, I haven't heard from you yet.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about in suburban gardens, 17-year locust flies. Perhaps I'm being literal here, but I thought of cicadas, which have a 17-year cycle. It can be quite invasive, although they're rather innocuous. But
yeah, I'm wondering if she purposely conflated locusts because that's the biblical plague with contemporary cicadas. It's very possible. And I don't know if they are related, actually. Bob, if you can make a short comment so we can move on, that would be great.
Totally. We already covered the plagues. Only hail is missing, but I think that the darkness
Hail is here.
Hail, hail, hail. Oh yeah, there it is. Hello, hail. Thank you. But the darkness of newsprint, in my mind, refers to the dark news that is always coming and surrounding us and putting us into a state of darkness and despair every day.
Yeah. Yeah. So she is looking at the plagues in very new ways. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Another long poem that I hope many of you have seen before, which is Muriel Rukeyser's Akiba. I will only have us, I hate to take poems out of context, but I also want to introduce you to important poems, and this is one of them. So she's also, just like Marge Piercy did in her poem Magid, doing a historical sweep of Jewish history. And I'll start here. All night down the centuries have heard music of passage, music of one child carried into the desert, firstborn forbidden by law of the pyramid, drawn through the water with the water-drawn people, led by the water-drawn man to the smoke mountain, the voice of the world speaking, the world covered by signs, the burning, the loving, the speaking, the opening, strong throat of sound from the smoking mountain, still flame, the spoken singing of a young child, the meaning beginning to move, which is the song, music of those who have walked out of slavery. And then, it continues to build, but the amazing, amazing description of Moses being the water-drawn man to the smoke mountain. It's just to die for language. And it gets carried through the poem. Anybody here? Again, I want to see if anybody is familiar with this poem. Okay, one well worth knowing, and Muriel Rukeyser in general is worth knowing. Okay. Micah.
Yeah, just a quick thought that when she called Moses the water-drawn man, of course, we all know that's what his name means, but it makes you think about it in a different way. And it made me realize that Moses is saved in the water the same way that Israel is saved in the water. So he's the water-drawn man and we're the water-drawn people.
Oh, beautiful. Nice. Nice, nice, nice. So Alicia Jo Rabin's, well, there's so much I could say about her, but we'll just read her poem to Pharaoh. I never understood why you couldn't just let my people go, even as the plagues approached, even when holding on now meant losing everything later. Now, I get it. It's terrible to separate, to say goodbye, and watch the world drift away like a sailor leaving shore, alone, and who knows for how long. No one belongs to anyone, Pharaoh. You are wrong about that. And yet the opposite is true too. We all belong to each other, which is what makes it so hard to let our people go. So I don't know the impetus for this poem, but I have a sense of what is going on here for her. And I'm just curious how you understand it. And to me, it's the now I get it that gives me the clue. Deborah, my friend Deborah.
Hi.
Hi.
This is wonderful. So I love everything Alicia Jo Rabins does, her many hats that she wears. But
Agreed.
it strikes me that it's reminiscent of some of these midrashim where Pharaoh is looked at in a more sympathetic way, like, you know, um, which is the opposite of, the Pharaoh. I mean, I have a big sign from Trua that I use, like, fighting Pharaoh since, Egypt or whatever it is, or whatever.
Fighting
Um,
tyrants, resisting tyrants since Pharaoh.
Existing tyrants since Pharaoh. And so Pharaoh is like the model of the tyrant. But this is like getting into, what does that separation mean for the tyrant? Like, what would the tyrant, that the humanity of the tyrant, but not just being, I'm just horrible, but there's something about the ties between the people you live with, even if they're slaves, and letting them go and be free and letting them leave you. It's to me, it's like, it's very striking and kind of poignant.
Yes. So when you can empathize with the enemy, which is what she's doing here, But I also, for me, I read it that this is a mother poem of what it means to let her children go and separate. For me, that's like the underpinning of where she got to this poem. But that's me. And I just don't know if that feels like it is possible or if I'm totally off with that reading. Cheryl.
I'm not able to be quite as empathetic as that. The way I look at it, we don't belong to Pharaoh, but we do belong to each other. And we can, all the Jews look out for each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let's see who hasn't spoken, who has a hand up. Lauren, and then, Lauren, and then we'll move on.
Just real quickly, I think this, now I get it, is a way of making the transition and allowing us to move forward. I don't know whether this is serendipitous or not, but I just got tracked back from a long conversation with somebody I didn't know that was a boat person from Vietnam. And this is the same story that I heard from her that we're telling ourselves and reminding ourselves again during Pesach. So it's a universal story, I think. And I think we need to keep that in mind when we all sit down around a table and we're talking to a universe. So
Exodus as immigrant story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Micah.
I wanted to offer another reading that I'm not sure is correct either. I read this as about, see, I'm not even sure if I agree with myself, but I read it at least in some way as being about those relationships that we can't leave even though we know they're bad for us.
Mm.
That sometimes leaving is harder than staying. Sometimes what you don't know is harder than what you do know. And like Pharaoh, and Pharaoh doesn't want to let us go, even though he knows that, what does he say? Holding on now means losing everything later. And that just that idea that it's hard to let things go or leave. And maybe that is about a parent and a child, but maybe it's also about
A
a
relationship.
marriage or,
Lovely. Lovely.
I don't know.
Thank you. Excellent. I was hoping you could expand my interpretation, and you did. Oh my gosh, there's so many good poems and 20 minutes. I'm going to skip this one, but you must read it. Just the title is so enticing. You can't put the Red Sea in a poem, and the first line is a famous poet warned. So find out why you can't put the Red Sea into a poem when you but we're going to look at a different Red Sea poem, which again, some of you will know, which is Yehuda Amichai, which is from a longer poem with the title, I Was Not One of the 6 Million. What is the span of my life? Open, close, open. So we're going to read only stanza 1 and 3. Stanza 3 appears in Mishkan Tefillah, the Reform Siddur, but out of context. So I'm giving you at least the beginning of the poem here and the title. I was not one of the 6 million who died in the Holocaust, not even one of those who survived. And I was not one of the 600,000 who came out of Egypt. I, for one, reached the promised land by sea. No, I was not in that number, though I still have the fire and the smoke within me, pillars of fire and pillars of smoke that guide me by night and by day. I still have inside me the mad search for emergency exits, for soft places, for the nakedness of the land, for the escape into weakness and hope. I still have within me the lust to search for living water. And what is the lifespan? What is the span of my life? I am like one who has come out of Egypt, and the Red Sea parted, and I walked on dry land. On my left and on my right, 2 walls of water. Behind me, Pharaoh and his army and horsemen. Before me, the desert, perhaps the promised land. This is the span of my life. And I think it's important to have the context of that first stanza about the Holocaust, because then you understand that he's saying that the Holocaust in his life was like the Pharaoh and his army from behind. And then what's in front of him as somebody who emigrated to Israel is the promised land. And that's the span of his life. I mean, that is the arc of his life. But it's out of context if you don't know part 1, I think, of this poem. What am I saying? Bob, I'm seeing your hand.
Yeah, I'm having a problem with the title since you offered it to us. Open, close, open. And I was trying to fit it into the parting of the Red Sea, but that was more close, open, close. So I don't know where that goes.
Yeah, it's a phrase that gets repeated in his last book, and it's the title of his last book, Open, Close, Open. So it gets repeated in a number of places. I'm a Yehuda Amichai fan. All of his papers and documents are at the Yale Library, and I made a trip a few months ago in hopes I'd find some yet untranslated poems that I might translate, but I'm not in luck. So I'm just going to have to retranslate poems that have already been translated. Let me move on to a funny poem called The Prophet Elijah, Possibly, on 9th Avenue, orders a ham and cheese sandwich, easy mayo. And it's by David Silverman. Just outside a small bodega in Hell's Kitchen, a street guy says to me, "Hey man, buy me a sandwich." Dressed in layers, smelling like turned milk, he could be my age, though it's hard to convert street years into roof over one's head years. I ask what he'd like. Ham and cheese, easy mayo, blueberry muffin, a small coffee, and enter the store to buy his meal. I remember a fable from my youth. The prophet Elijah dressed as a beggar, granting some random Jew the opportunity to hasten the redemption. All that's required to drop a kopeck in a cup, to look a man in his eyes. But every time the random Jew fails, it's hard to believe this never-ending defiance of the odds, this stingy streak, to not encounter a single decent Jew in 2,000 years. How tiresome it must be. Centuries of callous neglect, the inevitable disappointment. And finally, when the Jew realizes what he has done and attempts to erase the offense with a shower of too late largesse, Elijah cannot be bought, nor is he what you would call gracious. One time, appearing as an ugly man, he approached his mark and greeted him kindly. "Peace be upon thee, Rabbi." To which the Jew responded, "How hideous you are. Is anyone in this town as repulsive as you?" And Elijah, always prepared with a snappy comeback, says, "Perhaps you should tell the master architect how ugly is this, his construction." The Jew, realizing his grave error, begs the prophet's pardon, offers him money, says if only he'd known it was Elijah, he would never have uttered the hateful words. The prophet has heard such excuses 1,000 times, and each time, how much he yearned for a different outcome. For the record, I bought him 2 sandwiches, 2 muffins, 2 coffees, and slipped two $20 bills into the bag with the food because I did not have any 50s or hundreds. And when I handed him the bag, I did not look away, hoping to see in his rheumy eyes proof of the cosmic significance of our encounter. How much I did not want to see what I saw instead. Our chance meeting was no more than the world turning, as it has, as it does, as it always will, until redemption comes. Woo! Now, the tone is light. The mood is heavy. And that is the makings, I think, of great poems when they sort of are in tension with each other in a poem, is tone and mood. You start out, you have this encounter with a homeless man, and it might be Elijah. He wants this, even from the title, orders a ham and cheese. You think it's going to be a funny poem, and then you move your way through it, and it's very intense. And I don't know for any of you, like what your Elijah experiences are, but this hits me hard because of my own Elijah experiences, or believing that I'm being tested, by an Elijah figure. And do I come up short? Oh boy, could I tell stories. Micah.
I don't even know where to start. I love this so much.
Oh, I know.
I told myself I wasn't going to talk again, but then you read this poem. I just,
Micah, could you make your voice louder, please?
oh, Louise, maybe.
Thank you.
So I mean, first of all, the idea of potential Messiah pops into my head, which is that in every generation, there's always a potential Messiah, and that the people have to act in certain ways to bring out the redemption. And then this story in the middle, which is a Talmudic story, which is actually not an Elijah story, right?
Right.
But he's made it an Elijah story. And it's just so incredible the way, like, the interplay between, like, the person not knowing how to behave and wishing they had treated Elijah a certain way, and then the other person treating this guy this way, hoping it was Elijah, and everybody doesn't know what they don't know. This one doesn't know that it's not Elijah, or that it is Elijah, and this one doesn't know that by buying that sandwich, he's actually hastening the redemption. He thinks that it was just an ordinary encounter, but in fact, that's the only way to make the world better. You have, even though you thought it wasn't, even though you did it because you were hoping to redeem the world and then you didn't, it turns out you did because you bought a sandwich for a hungry person.
Yeah. It's a keeper. Okay, I'm gonna go on just because there's still so many more. There's another Elijah poem here by Hannah Yerushalmi. There is another well-known poem that appears in the Baskin Haggadah, if anybody has the Baskin Haggadah, called The Kid from the Haggadah by Natan Alterman, which is just beautiful. You're going to read that one at home. I'm going to read one of mine. This one, I'm going to read this one. Ode to Horseradish. I used to search for you in the produce aisle at Stop and Shop before Passover. You were lanky and gnarled, your rooty rump fresh from the soil, medieval like a spiky vegetarian bludgeon, ready for battle. You were more than a girl like me would need for show on the seder plate and my obligatory bite of bitters. I buried you to grow invasive as a weed, then deracinate you before the holiday each year, unclenching your stubborn claws. I chop you, give chunks away to those who think you come naturally magenta, steeped in vinegar and beets from a jar. When they taste the real you, unvarnished, flatbread and flashbacks thrash in their packs, as they pray for release from unsung servitudes, tears running down their cheeks. Yeah, I love it. I love the sounds, especially that I worked in there at the end. Again, like poetry is about music. They're not always, but when you can master that, I think you have something, and I don't always. So I'm happy with that part of the poem. Let's see. What are we going to do here? We're going to do Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt's poem, 4 Questions. Four questions in 5 stanzas, 5 couplet stanzas. Will you and your parents sit down to seder on high on the night when we sit down to seder below? Who sings the 4 questions? The person in the family most newly arrived to the afterlife? Will you thank the Holy One, blessed be God, for lifting you with mighty hand and outstretched arm out of the Mitzrayim of your bodies, your illnesses, cancer or dementia or broken down lungs? Will you dip parsley in salt water? Or are the tears you cried in this world enough to last you for eternity? So there are 4 questions in these 5 stanzas. Because you have these 2 stanzas, there's only 1 question. An opportunity is provided here for you, for anybody who's a poet, to write your own poem called 4 Questions. And what would those 4 questions be? We have to ask who's the you, because she's not implicating the speaker, because the speaker is implicated in the we on earth sitting to seder below. So the assumption is, I think, to a recently departed parent, and then your parents are grandparents. That's my sense. Will you and your parents sit down to seder on high? And who gets to sing the 4 questions? Is it the person most newly arrived to the afterlife? If you having seder up there? And are you grateful that you're no longer in pain? And what do the tears symbolize when you're in the next world? I think it's a beautiful poem and a beautiful way of reimagining the afterlife and bringing Passover into it. Any thoughts, comments? Okay, so 6 minutes. Which one do I want to do? I put that in there twice for some reason, the courage one. So good. So we have time for Afikomen by Jean Nordhaus. No, I don't want to do that one. What is a good poem for us? Let's look at this short one, and then we'll have time for yet another one. This is not a Jewish poet, Martin Espada, but it definitely invokes Exodus. Imagine the angels of bread. It's an excerpt. If the abolition of slave manacles began as a vision of hands without manacles, then this is the year. If the shutdown of extermination camps began as imagination of a land without barbed wire or the crematorium, then this is the year. If every rebellion begins with the idea that conquerors on horseback are not many-legged gods, that they too drown if plunged in the river, then this is the year. So this is not a poem that was written recently, but good political poems come alive anew in every generation. And this is one of those that speaks to our times with a lot of hope, I think, for those of us of a certain political bent, and what our hopes are for the year to come. Deborah?
Yeah, the the trajectory of the Haggadah is to go from despair and darkness and humiliation to hope and comfort and and looking toward a messianic time of peace. And to me, this poem, I don't want to read the whole thing now, but this poem has that in a time when I personally feel so filled with despair, that, right, what Micah just said, the first step to repairing the world is to imagine it redeemed and to really believe that something else, something better is possible. So it's beautiful. I also loved your poem about horseradish.
Thank you. Thank you. It makes me feel, I did not include one of my other poems in the packet that's called Exodus, but it really does feel like, in a way, a follow-up to this Martin Espada one. That maybe I'm going to pull that one up for the screen, if you don't mind, because it's contemporary, might be a little dark. Exodus. My brother-in-law insisted they are free agents doing it willingly. That's not slavery, he said, accusing me of spreading fake news across the divided sea of my seder table, along with the vegetarian chopped liver. The statistics were sitting there next to the 4 questions and the 10 plagues in the Slavery Today section of my Xeroxed Haggadah. How many girls and women are sex trafficked, shipped across borders to service randy men at Super Bowls and conventions, Democratic, Republican, you name it. I stared at Elijah's untouched cup of wine as my other guests swirled horseradish on their plates, holding their breath. Sitting next to his father, my nephew, nearly adult, the one who hadn't thought to remove or be embarrassed by the bare-breasted posters on his otherwise naked wall when I dropped by his dorm the previous month. I wondered if they were complicit in the lie of willing female flesh, if my nephew had been egged on by his father to get some, that I was threatening their bond. I told my nephew then, nodding at his fleshy walls, "You know women are more than tits and ass." He'd snorted at my crassness, averted his eyes. I had to say something to his father, whom I know to be a good and decent man, devoted to his children, to my sister, to me. It was Passover, the night of defying fetters of bondage. I didn't want to play nice to Pharaoh. My other company surely expected a seasoning of decorum with their salt water and kugels. Seder means order, after all. But I was thinking about those women on planes with well-dressed handlers or sardined in vans crossing state lines, and about the Hebrew slaves whose exodus would be hollow, if not to instruct us in vigilance even now, don't you think? But what I managed was, let's open the door for Elijah the prophet. And there, the sky, full mooned and bright, pierced me. Eternity in space and time, its bigness, thinking of the evil that would go on forever despite me, ancient like the desert and the Red Sea. So I am not as hopeful as the Martin Espada poem. For me, it might go on forever. It's a darker vision to end with. Maybe we need to reread the other one about the end of the chariots and their riders into the sea. But we are 2 minutes past 4. So let me just reread that last line. If every rebellion begins with the idea that conquerors on horseback are not many-legged gods, that they too drown if plunged in the river, then this is the year. And may it be.
Thank you to Rabbi Pamela Wax for this wonderful hour of poetry. And thanks to everybody who contributed to the discussion, for being here, for your presence, for simply being part of this. Wishing you all a peaceful and a meaningful Pesach. And I have a feeling some of this poetry will show up around some of our Seder tables tomorrow night. So I hope it'll be a happy holiday, and I hope that we'll meet again in more peaceful times soon, including possibly next Monday at our next class. Thanks, everybody, and Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you. It was great.
Great.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Meh.